but they were presenting the forum as if this was going to be a discussion on judicial elections and retention elections and the appointment of judges without an opposing viewpoint there. And so this panel was basically going to be 3 people plus the moderator, so ended up being 4 against 1, but Greg Wurzel, I think, called in there and got to be on the panel. Otherwise, he wasn't invited, and they were just going to have this, you know, joyful session of holding hands together and saying that taking away the people's right to vote is a good thing to do. So that's kind of the setup for the situation. So it was very much anti-judicial elections, but Greg was there to say his piece. So let's run some clips here and there, and we'll see what has to be said.
Let me turn to Mr. Wurzel. Would you like to make some opening comments?
Surely. I have fought long and hard for elections that work because we need to find a way to hold judges accountable. And having practiced law for 31 years, I've been in front of many judges who do not want to follow the law, tell you they're not going to follow the law, judges who are rude, but they're rude towards everyone. Let's face it. They treat the litigants like dirt. They treat the attorneys like dirt. So I guess that's fairness. The point is that somehow we have to hold judges accountable. And the proposal that's been made, this merit selection, is nothing short of a disaster. I have called it a constitutional malpractice. Because the entire purpose of it is not to hold judges accountable, it's to find every means to hold them unaccountable. There is no merit selection, despite the title of the bill, which is that it's a merit selection bill. Merit selection is not contained in the bill at all. There is an advisory committee, and then the governor will either follow or not follow their recommendation as to who to select. And in terms of accountability, the bill specifically states that the commission, this Judicial Performance Evaluation Commission, is not to look at the decisions that a judge makes, any decision that is potentially appealable. Well, all the decisions a judge makes are potentially appealable, and therefore they're not going to be looking at that. What they are going to look at is the judge's impartiality, his temperament, his respect for the law, oh, and don't forget that important thing, his punctuality. That's what the commission is going to look at. So the problem is, ladies and gentlemen, what we need is to somehow have a system where we can hold judges accountable. Literally 94% of the judges in this state have been appointed to their positions. It's actually over 94%. So we already really have an appointment system. The only question now is, once they've been appointed, how do we hold them accountable? How are we going to, when they don't do their job, when they tell you they're not going to follow the law, and I've seen judges do that, when they don't follow the sentencing laws of the state of Minnesota, when they flagrantly violate people's constitutional rights, how are you going to get rid of these people? My suggestion to you is you do it through free, open, and competitive elections, and then you have an opponent out there to tell you what is wrong. The Performance Commission is not going to tell you what's wrong. They're going to tell you if the gentleman, the lady or gentleman, is punctual. I want to know what kind of decisions he makes, and have they been making good decisions. And I think that's what most members of the public would expect.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wurzel.
Until there's some meaningful accountability, and of course, what's the definition of meaningful? We don't have accountability in our judicial system. It's very weak. And when these kind of statements were brought up with Judge Magnuson, he just, he was making all kinds of faces, oh, that's not true. I mean, he's a defense for the judiciary. And there's a reason to defend the judiciary and why the judiciary needs to be defended. And their reason is that if people knew what was going on, there wouldn't be any confidence in the judiciary, and therefore people would revolt. Well, I'm saying you can't have confidence in the judiciary. You can have confidence in the judiciary, but it's by fraud. And that's what's taking place right now, is this fraud, because they are covering up what's going on. And there was a number of questions relating to that aspect that I was being covered up, and Chief Justice Magnuson didn't like that. And anyway, so we got a phone call here. Let's take that phone call. Caller, do you have a comment or question?
Hi, Tim. I can't hear you very well. Can you hear me?
I can hear you great. Can you hear me?
Excellent show. And I was, what I'd like to do is find out what is the replay schedule, because a lot of people have been wondering when they could see the show again.
Well, that's been a work in process, because we found out some things were not going on quite right. There's some procedures that got changed, and nobody knew that, and so we thought replay was going on. Replay is on Friday morning, the following Friday at 7 a.m.
Okay,
when they
because
can see the show again. And so I have to go through an extra process that I didn't know that I had to go through. So it wasn't being replayed, so this was all you'd get it in this area. So now Friday mornings at 7 a.m. you can see it.
Excellent. And the other thing I need an update on is with the, and I believe that following your show in the past, and I've missed it in the past couple of weeks, there was some contention there about this, I think it was into the federal court in Minnesota, and it went to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, and it went to the en banc. I remember you had a interview with an attorney who wanted to run for the Minnesota Supreme Court. Her name was Miss Clark.
Right.
Whatever came of that?
Well, the 8th Circuit has not come up with their answer, and what we think is happening is there's 2 judges that agreed with their position, and so, which I also found out in this process, in the appellate courts and in district court in the state, you got 90 days to respond. Once it's been held, the hearing's been held. But in federal courts, there's no timeline. They can take forever. And so the opposing judge here, or 2 judges, we don't know, are taking their time to answer the questions that were raised before them. And one was, do we take impeachment off our ballots? Is that a violation by putting it on there of Constitution? And then the second one is whether this appointment process for our courts is also a violation of our Constitution, because the intent of our Constitution is for elections, but what the judges have done is they've overturned that by their judicial rulings and actions, where now judges are just being appointed, as Greg Wursel just said. So the potentiality of an order coming out in the 8th Circuit saying, hey, you got to have now an election, a special election for that seat, that's a possibility. That's happened before from the federal court. So we'll see how it plays out, but we don't know when there's going to be an answer. That's what I've been told. I've been calling them, what's going on, shouldn't we have an answer by now? And that's their answer to me. So they were hoping to, but it didn't come through.
And what's actually shocking to me is I thought the United States Federal Court of Appeals in the different areas, the different circuits, they had books and books of rules of procedure, and so that everybody, with the hope that everybody would be treated fairly. However, apparently, it sounds like that the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, I think you called it the en banc court, do they follow any rules on how many days they're required to decide anything, or?
My understanding is no. There's none anywhere in that process.
In the court, the 3-judge appeal court panels, is
Right.
there
The three-court panel and the full Eighth Circuit, they don't have any timeline as to when they have to give their decision. And basically something can die there. Same with the Supreme Court. They can hear a case, they don't have to give a decision. However, you know, there is pressure once they've heard a case to get an order out, you know, and that'd be something that the press could pick up on to say, hey, where's this order? Put a little pressure on them, you know, get the papers and the TVs to say, where's the decision on this? I mean, come on, let's go. And there's some decisions that are just out there for years, and we don't hear the answers.
When you as the press or your competitors, the Pioneer Press, when they contact the judiciary on something like that, do they just walk up to the chief judge's office and ask them, or do they go through are you required to go through some sort of procedure as the press to get this information?
I think you probably just have to talk to the attorneys involved, but then you can go to the clerk of courts and say, and they'll send messages, the clerks will send messages to the judge. You ask them, well, where's the decision? But this is such an ingrained process that asking the clerks or trying to call the judges, you can do that too. You're not going to get a response from them, I'm pretty sure. And so the main thing is get out on the main press. Why don't we have a decision on this case? It's been 1.5 years or 2 years. Now, of course, the current case with Jill Clark and Greg Wurzel has only been, you know, a couple months at most. Wow,
that is fascinating, because I'm actually stunned that there's not procedures.
That's what I'm told. That's what I'm told.
Because I was under the belief that the courts try to do everything by routine procedure so that they can at least give the perception that there's fairness involved, and that there's not a lot of backroom dealing and negotiating and other. And for instance, in this case,
it's not political.
With this case with Miss Clark, do the judges go out and do their own research on this? Do they review books, search the internet?
They have their law clerks that go do the research and help them put the material together. They do their own research.
So they can take other evidence that they actually, I mean, this court, they can go get their own evidence, and they don't have to only rely on what goes on in court.
Right. Well, and now you see a pattern where they go out to the federal or out to other countries and say, well, this country in their constitution says this, and we should adopt that in our international law. Well, you know, it's our constitution. That's what we go by. And so we got a bad scenario. That's why I'm taking efforts and pains to help reform our judiciary here in Minnesota, and hopefully that then spreads, you know, nationwide to reform the changes and laws are passed to reform the federal judiciary so these type of things don't happen. So
and see what I wish, because your show is very enjoyable, but it focuses such a small portion of the time on the federal system, and that's no indication the federal system is less non-biased, less criminal, less corrupt than the state that.
Well, like Greg Wurzel saying, judges are human. Okay, they go in there with all their biases. I want to elect a judge that's biased towards our Constitution. And at least we know what the groundwork is so that when fraud takes place or when a judge goes against the Constitution, we can then go and get that judge out or change our laws that are unconstitutional. But we got this mishmash of no rhyme or reason coming out of our courts, and deception and fraud that's taking place that we can't make heads or tails of what's actually happening.
Great. Well, hey, I always enjoy the show. I always look for some the new stuff you have, because you're one of the few institutions here that is actually pulling the curtain back and just giving us a little glimpse of transparency of what goes on.
Well, thank you for that, and you're right on that. And the good news is I am seeing glimmers of hope in other areas. Other press are starting to pick up on these issues and some of the corruption, and even the Board on Judicial Standards is stepping it up a little bit and actually